street, they were completely rammed. They were filled up to the gunnels, they were queuing down the street. They said, you should have been here last week. I swear, you should have been here last week. Oh yeah, you should have been here last week.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of our podcast, You Should Have Been Here Last Week, hosted by myself, Steve Gribbin, and fellow comic Paul Ricketts, in which we interview the movers and the shakers and interesting characters involved in the comedy industry, as we like to call it. And this week we have a very, very special guest, Ian Moore, stand-up comedian. It says, I'm reading out the list of your accomplishments, but also highly successful novelist. I'm one of the greatest, the snappiest dressers on the comedy circuit, the wonderful Ian Moore. So welcome to the show, Ian.
Thanks very much for having me, Steve and Paul. Nice to be here.
Yeah. I mean, we start off by asking you basically, how did you first get started in comedy? What was the sort of the impetus for you to become a comedian?
There was no impetus from me at all. I went to see a gig at the Banana in 1995 with a friend of mine, and she's my oldest friend, and we've known each other since we were 13, and we were both living in South London at the time. And we came out, and she said, "What do you think?" And I just did that typical bloke thing and went, "Yeah, I could do that." And just thought that would be it. And then she rang me up a couple of weeks later and said, "All right, you put your money where your mouth is. I've booked you a 5-minute open spot." It was in Tunbridge Wells. I think the Spanner and something. It was a pub. It was just one of these pub things.
So your first gig was an out of town gig.
It was, yeah. I always like to do the Shires and then work up to the West End before I got it ready.
And what was that first gig like?
Do you know what? I have no idea. I mean, it must have gone okay, but I think I was so terrified that the memory of the actual gig itself escapes me. I can remember the nervousness leading up to it. I can remember the kind of euphoria after it, but the actual stage and gig time, I have no recollection of at all. None at all.
Yeah, I remember Tunbridge Wells. It used to be there was a very, very long running gig there by Off the Curb, and they used to give everybody a note, didn't they? The note said, "Please do not refer to Tunbridge Wells as Royal Tunbridge Wells because they're fed up with it." And
absolutely,
it's in the bloody name. Oh,
but it was quite funny then to go in and just go, "You are," and just repeat that, because I always ended up comparing it. So I'd always read that out and say, "I'm really sorry that you people are on your uppers, and that you've all, come in on a caravan from Chelsea." And it was silly that you had to be given warnings like that, but so many people did the same stuff that I guess you had to do it.
I know, yeah. And so you really sort of made the crossover, not crossover, but you became a very highly successful novelist. I mean, what was the sort of the idea behind that? I mean, did you always want to do that, or?
I think the thing was that when I moved to France in 2005, and so the commuting every week just became tougher and tougher and tougher.
I remember meeting you in like green rooms, and you always looked knackered.
Oh, just absolutely exhausted. Just trying to get by on adrenaline, and the thing was that the gigs became the least important part of the whole trip. It was about travel and about connections and about how could I double up with that to make it worthwhile. So each gig I was concentrating less and less on, and therefore enjoying it less. And I just had to. And I was ill by that time as well, so traveling was really, really difficult. So it became a kind of necessity an absolute necessity to find something other than gigging, and writing is obviously the next thing you try.
So I'm thinking the subtext to this particular episode is how to escape comedy.
Yeah, well, that's the thing.
I looked at your website and I thought, this is a man who successfully escaped tramping along the motorway, standing in train stations, and found because I want to ask you several questions. Going further back here, we seem to have jumped the whole thing about why. Yeah. How did you get to France? Why did you get to France? I mean, where are you originally from? I know it sounds like the worst question for any black person to ask a white person.
I mean, how dare you?
Well, yes.
I'm from Blackburn originally, but then we moved around a lot when I was small, and I ended up in London. And my wife is half French, and we just reached a point where we just had our first son, and we were like, why are we living in Crawley? You know, why? I mean, her parents were living in Crawley, so that's why we were living in Crawley. Yeah. But I just thought, all right, so we want a bigger family. I'm going to have to work 7 nights a week on the worst gigs everywhere to keep up with a mortgage in a place I don't want to live in. And that was the way I looked at it. So we were coming to France on holiday every year, and we were looking at the property prices and going, oh my God, we could sell this Lego box we have on an estate in Crawley and get a demi-chateau with acres and acres of land for the same price, but we'd be mortgage free, and I could just commute back because I don't have to be anywhere specific to live because I'm gigging in a different place every weekend. And that was the whole reason behind it. And at the time, I just thought, this is easy. You know, the flight, my local airport is like 45 minutes drive away. The flight into London Stansted was like 50 minutes. And you just think, this is easier than getting a commuter train in from Sidcup. This would be so easy. I mean, it didn't work out that way, but initially, that's how I sold it to myself and subsequently my wife. Yeah. So, which is why we came here.
When you first went to France, could you speak French, or did you have to really?
No, I could speak a little bit, but not. No. in a word, no. Very, very little.
I like that. It's
very, very little.
Was it a very steep learning curve though? Because you sort of like pitched straight into it. Obviously, you've got to.
Well, no, less so for me because I wasn't there very much. So when I came home, I was knackered and wouldn't even unpack my case. I'd get home on a Sunday night and I would leave again on a Thursday morning and virtually see nobody other than the boulanger, and I could get by on a baguette, s'il vous plaît, for 3 days a week. It was harder for the boys. Natalie was fluent, obviously, and she had family living in the town that we moved to. But I mean, my son, who was 4 when we moved here, was very reluctant initially to try and even make the effort. It was only. I remember he was making no friends. He hadn't been at school very long at this point, but he was very reluctant to try. And I said, "Look, I'll buy you a lightsaber if you make more of an effort." And within 2 weeks, he was fluent. And that is the power of Star Wars.
What is lightsaber in French?
Le sabre de légère. No, le sabre d'allumé. Épée d'allumé. There's so many variations you could possibly have on that. Yeah.
I mean, I love the way they've sort of gone back on that now, but the French used to. There was a big movement, wasn't it, to get rid of all, le weekend. They wanted to get rid of all foreign words and get their own words for them.
Well, there's just no chance. There's just no chance. They're fighting a losing battle because I forget the figures, but there's something like 600,000 words in English, and obviously that includes American, but only 70,000 words in French. And everything new that comes out is not, is a more global word. So it's American English, not English. So they're just fighting a losing battle completely. And it gets some people really annoyed, which is fun to watch. I have to say.
Yeah, the iPhone. Did they say iPhone? They have to say iPhone.
Be iPhone. Yeah. And you know, they had this email, which is so easy, and obviously, but the French, the Académie Française, which is the kind of custodian of the French language, said no, it's not email, it's le courrier de mail, which is, you know, that's 4 words. Everybody, it's like, no, we're not doing that, mate. We're not doing that, pal. Mon ami, it's me.
I do remember you telling me once that you became, so in your local community they referred to you as the Englishman, didn't they? And
Monsieur So British. That was my nickname, Monsieur So British.
What
did they think was so British?
Yeah.
Well, there wasn't many mods wearing Edwardian frock coats in the boulangerie queue in the morning. I think that's probably what gave it away. You know, and I would try it, but my accent is so my accent's not good. I've worked on it for years and years and years, and I do gig in French, and I always make it clear at the start of the gig that I will say, look, you can either have the words or the accent, but you can't have both, and you certainly can't have both at the same time. So you're going to have to make a choice.
I mean, what is that like, gigging? I mean, doing a gig in another language. I mean,
the first time I did it, I was utterly terrified, because you're flying on one engine, and you know you've got 4, because you haven't got the ability to, you know, riff. I don't really like the word in terms of comedy, but you can't be relaxed. You can't react to a situation as quickly as you would like, or react to a reaction as quickly as you would like. So you are basically just doing the material without any kind of real personality behind it. So it certainly initially it was very, very difficult. And I remember I did the first gig I did in French. There was a French actor who came on after me, and she was quite new. She wasn't very experienced herself, so she hadn't really judged the room. And my gig had gone really well. And she came on and she went, "That guy, how on earth did you understand his accent? That's just a, you know, awful accent." And they booed her. The crowd booed her because they had it in their head that I was this sort of character act who'd done an appalling accent deliberately.
Brilliant.
And therefore she had misjudged not only the room but me as well, which wasn't fair. I mean, it was an appalling accent. It wasn't deliberate at all. But I kind of prey on that now when I do a French gig, that I, you know, will make sure that it is, you know. I was once employed. I've always looked for various jobs over here, and I was employed to do a voiceover for a game, a video game thing, and I'd had a few jobs through this company in Paris, and I would go up and I'd do these, you know, screeching into a microphone and cries and all of that, and they employed me to play a role of an invading Viking. But I would speak French, and the reason why they employed me was that they wanted somebody whose accent was really quite bad. So you'd know that they were speaking French, but that they weren't French.
Yeah.
And I started it, and they sacked me after 10 minutes and said, "Your accent is so bad that that it goes way beyond the remit, and nobody's going to understand the word."
You're like the Dick Van Dyke of
worse than Dick Van Dyke.
I like Mary Poppins. I'd like to ask what French audiences are like to play to. How's their behaviour, and how do they react to comedy?
The biggest difference, the biggest difference is that obviously the British have this reputation that they can laugh at themselves. The sort of self-deprecation and self-mockery is part of their psyche, whereas it certainly isn't in France. You can't get away with that in France. They'll take it very personally that you are slating them. So if I do a gig in English, I will mock the English, because that's how we do it. We laugh at ourselves. But if I'm doing a gig in French, I will still mock the English. Because that's what they expect, you know, and they wouldn't take it any other way.
I mean, really, if you sort of went on and did that kind of classic thing, oh, good to be in Toulouse, what a shithole this place is, they'd get really angry.
Well, they just wouldn't get angry. They just go, hang on, this is not why we're here. We're French. This is the greatest Toulouse in the Toulouse region. We're not having this kind of nonsense.
I mean, and also, what about styles of comedy? What sort of things are popular in France in the way of?
Well, it's more physical. I think there's more physical humour that's still, the classic one that's always sort of trotted out is that they're all fans of Benny Hill, which I don't know if that's true. You don't see Benny Hill on television, that's for sure. They love Mr. Bean, but then Mr. Bean is completely universal because it's physical. I remember years ago we were staying with family for Christmas, and my wife's uncle said, "Oh, you're a stand-up comedian, you'll love this," and he put this DVD on, and it was basically the Charlie Chaplin dancing with the pencils in the potato. But with a silhouetted background and so it's just the heads above that, and it was just pure puppetry. It was quite childish puppetry, and that and I think that's still quite pervasive on television. You don't get a lot of the satire is more spitting image, the Grand Guignol on an evening, but you don't see a lot of. It's very slapstick based still. I think there's no kind of circuit here, or there wasn't certainly 15 years ago. There's more of a circuit now, and it's a really interesting circuit because it's come out of the suburbs of big cities, so it's very sort of North African pushed, if you like. It's almost the way rap grew in the 70s, that people who feel like they're disenfranchised by what's going on elsewhere, this is their outlet for it, which is a really interesting thing.
Well, that sounds pretty vibrant.
Yeah, it is, and it's growing more and more. But it's also growing in terms of an American model, which means that people aren't earning money out of it, and they're doing like 6 or 7 shows, shuffling around 3 or 4 gigs in Paris doing that. So there's not we got very lucky when certainly when I started just the right time that I could sell my soul to the jongler's devil, and I was able to make a living out of it. There was no artistry involved in that.
I mean, that's fascinating because friends of mine have told me that they have seen stand-up, French stand-up, but exactly borne out by what you said, that it was rare until quite recently, that it's getting more prevalence. So going back to we could talk about the novels now, because why did you choose the genre that you chose?
Every single comic has chosen the same genre, pretty much. That's a massive generalisation.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say. Yeah, I've got Billingham, Queeve, me. Who's the fourth?
Evans.
Dan Evans.
Dan Evans.
Yeah. Dan Evans, of course. Dan, yes, of course.
D.I.
Snaith. Well, D.I. Snaith, and they're great books. They're really a lot of fun, those books. I always suggested to Dan that he should make them. What's the adult word for comic books?
Graphic novel.
Graphic novels.
That's it. It's the same thing, But I think they make great graphic novels. Anyway, yes, mine are more certainly the ones that have been bestsellers. The Folly Valley series that I write, that they're more comic than the others.
Right.
They're more, there's an element of slapstick to it, and I just. To be honest, I'd written a serious crime novel and tried to push it with agents, and it didn't get anywhere. And I self-published it then, and then realised that self-publishing is so much hard work, and that I didn't have the energy or the time to devote to that, because you need more energy in self-publishing to push it than you do to even write the bloody thing in the start. So I sat down, and this was sort of early 2019. I sat down and went, right, I need to change career. I need to do something, but I'm just going to write something I want to read, which is a purely comic crime novel set in rural France. I'd opened up a B&B at that time, a chambre d'hôte here, and so I based it around a middle-aged Englishman who owns a chambre d'hôte. That was the centre for it, and partly because I thought, well, this is a great center for a book where you can get different characters coming in and out in different stories, but also it was a cathartic experience because I was so bad at hospitality that
you were famously grumpy host, weren't you? I know.
Oh,
I used to see your
awful,
posts.
just awful, and rude. And I just thought, well, I could sort of kill my guests in a literature sense, or kill them in a literary sense. And obviously, your TripAdvisor ratings go down if you actually murder your guests. So I just thought I'd put them in books. And it's worked. It worked out pretty well.
I mean, how many is it? 5 now you've done? 5?
I'm writing the 5th now. I've had the 4th. The 4th one of that series is being published this June. That's Death in Le Jardin. But I write another series as well, which is more serious and sort of more. I call it Morse on tour. It's that kind of more cerebral, but not heavy psychological noir. But again, those are set in France, and I really enjoyed writing those. And I've written the second one of those, and I'll start on the third one of those after I've written the 5th one of the other. I've set up some kind of crime sweatshop here in rural. Loads of kids just banging them out.
Yeah,
very little money.
I mean, when you write them, do you write them in English and then they're translated into French, or?
Oh yeah. No, I would never write them in French. I'm fluent now. According to my wife, I'm fluent now, but that's not something I like to put about in case people test you out.
Oh God, yeah.
But I would never start with the idea of writing them in French.
Did publishers take you seriously straight away when you went to them, coming from comedy?
I got very lucky with this. Well, the first one in this series was called Death and Croissant, and I just got lucky straight away. I found an agent, and a publisher was sort of lined up already because I had contacts with. Because I published a couple of books about 10 years ago about moving to France and being a comedian on the road and having the two lives. So I had some contacts from there. In fact, that was called À la Mode. The first one I wrote about of that, and that's been re-released this year, been re-released and repackaged and called Vive le Chaos, which is, it's interesting that the books, the crime books, have been so successful that the publisher has gone back and scraped what they can.
Your early albums.
Catalog.
Yeah, your early albums have been repackaged.
These are an early pressing at Sun City Studios that are going to make the light of day.
This is a true story about French attitudes. I know Parisians are meant to be much ruder than the rest of France, but I actually went into, and I used to be able to speak a bit of French, but I went into this patisserie in the centre of Paris, and I just said, je voudrais acheter un croissant, and she went, and she made me say the word croissant about 10 times and just affected not to know what I was talking about. So in the end, I was reduced to going, and then she went, croissant, right in my face like this. And I felt about that big.
Paris is an entirely different world. I've got really good friends in Paris, but you just hit upon these big city attitudes whose livelihood actually depends on people like you going in and buying a croissant. But they're so willing to burn that bridge that will make you go through hell. But outside of France, it just isn't like that. You know, I mean, we've been here 20 years next January, and we've just been, you know, just delightfully accepted since the minute we arrived. You know, I mean, obviously that's a lot to do with the fact that Natalie's French. She had family here. The kids have grown up completely bilingual and as French as English, but I've never encountered anything like that. The only rudeness I've encountered around here is me from my own B&B. That I'm about the rudest person in the area, so I'm carrying that sort of Parisian tradition further south.
Chutney, because I just thought, I mean, the idea that you go to France and then make chutney, that's I just love the name anyway. I mean, sounds like should be part of London.
It sounds vaguely disgusting as well. You say that you're a chutney producer. It just sounds euphemistically appalling. We moved in here. The people who sold this place had one daughter. It's a big place, and they had one daughter. And for her 21st birthday, they planted 21 fruit trees. And this is which is a lovely gesture. But she very rudely just went, I don't like trees, I don't like fruit, and I don't like this place. Right? She was some angry, spoiled little girl. And they immediately put the house on the market, like the day after her 21st birthday, having done this gesture. Yeah, and we, like 2 hours later, turned up and signed a compromis d'avant. So within 24 hours, they had this fit of faith that their place was on the market, and it was sold, and we took it.
What a birthday party that was!
I know, what a disaster. And so we had this orchard, and just so much fruit. There's so much fruit, and I'm not a fruit eater because, and I used to say this on stage as the lead up to the sort of chutney material, the chutney material. As the lead up to this, I used to say, look, I don't eat fresh fruit. I'm a mod. I don't want any juice on my Fred Perry. That's not the way forward. So I would literally we'd take the surface of fruit and I'd boil all the goodness out of it and stick a load of vinegar and sugar in it and make chutney. And I just happened to mention this a couple of times early on when I started doing it, and it kind of stuck. People, every interview, I would have to go, so what chutney do you do? And I built up this whole myth around me being this independent chutney producer in France, which I made a load of chutney, but I mean I was not selling it at all, but people kind of fell for that nonsense that I was an independent producer of chutney in rural France, which it would never have caught on. I mean, the thing was, it's changed now. There's a sort of relaxing of the chutney attitudes now, but certainly initially, the idea that you would be served local French cheese and you'd say, hey, do you want some of this stuff that I've boiled into a jar to have with you? You'd be deported.
Local chutney for local people. So I'd like to ask as well, I mean, you're still doing some comedy, aren't you? You haven't given up entirely. Are you still coming over and doing gigs, or
only corporate stuff?
Right.
Only corporate stuff. I did my last circuit gig I did nearly a year ago, which was in Harrogate. And I was at the Harrogate Crime Writing Festival and having a great time. And then somebody dropped out at a gig that Toby Jones runs. And so I went across town. And it's such a lovely gig. You know that gig, the Harrogate Theatre.
Oh, God, it's so
out.
Nice.
And I had a great time. And I came off and it literally fell into Toby's arms, a little bit of a tear. And I just went, that's it. I'm done. That's the perfect ending. It was, I'm here to sell books and to talk to crime writing fans, but I've done this, and it's just the perfect sort of relay that the baton has been handed on, and that was it. That was it as far as circuit comedy goes. But like I say, I'll do the corporate stuff which I'm happy to do, obviously. But
Yeah.
It's not as glorious as Harrogate Theatre on a Saturday night. But.
Yeah, but it pays well, doesn't it?
It pays well, and and I do enjoy a lot of it. I do mainly awards ceremonies, and I enjoy them. I just enjoy them, and because a lot of comics go into corporates with the wrong attitude, like they're above them, or the idea that the corporates are beneath them as an art, or they're expecting to die, or whatever. I just don't. I just go in there and just enjoy myself,
I mean, you probably got better suits than a lot of people they're at the corporates, haven't you?
Well, that was the thing. That was the thing when I first, because obviously when I've been here about, when was this, 2011, and it was getting more and more expensive to commute every weekend, and I needed the corporate work to be able to continue to do the circuit work, but also to live where we're living. And I said to my agent at the time, I need more corporate work, and he said we could get you more corporate work, but it's your sideburns that are holding you back. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
It's sideburns or no. I've done very well out of it, and refuse to compromise on facial hair of any kind.
Yeah,
so
good for you.
Yeah.
I think we're running out of time, Paul, aren't we?
Yes, we are. That's what happens every time, round about this time of the podcast.
Round about this time, yeah, I know. It's been really interesting. I mean, the whole thing about corporates is a whole other thing in itself, because there's so many. That's very interesting that you should say that about that attitude, because I have done some, but I mean they've mainly been disasters because I'm not. But it's horses for courses. But I've always gone in with the attitude that I'm not good enough to do them, and maybe that's coloured. Yeah,
it's like 90% of comics talk themselves out of a corporate before they've got there, and then they'll see the setup and go, "Well, I can't work with this." Whereas if it was just a club, you'd go in and go, "Right, I'm just going to use my skills and we'll get through it."
Yeah,
and that's really all you need to do. We've all done gigs that are far worse setups than 99% of corporates. Okay, you might struggle at the odd one, you might die at the odd one, but you are being paid well for the skills that you've accrued over the years. And that's a nice position to be in, because you can storm a gig for 80 quid on a Tuesday night in Sutton. You feel good about yourself, but I'd rather have $2,000 for the hotel down the road.
That's very
using
true.
the same skills, and the audiences aren't that much different. And one of the main reasons I'm good at corporates is that obviously traditionally your corporate audience is a middle-aged white audience, I would say, and they are largely disappointed in life. So when they're faced with a middle-aged white comic who can express their disappointments in life, we get on pretty well. We've got that middle corporate ground.
So I've never really looked at it like that before. Disappointments is the key word, isn't it?
It is. It really is. It really is. Just because they're high rollers doesn't mean they're not, going, "Oh God, I've got to pay for this. I've got to pay for that." I found that kind of that middle ground with a corporate audience that works.
I think this is the end of the podcast. I'm going to congratulate you, Ian, for finding a successful way, a wonderful way out of stand-up comedy.
Like Houdini, with one bound, he was
that's
free.
What this should be called: escape from comedy. I think
that's exactly what I'm going to call it.
I think with the hat as well, I like to feel like I'm James Coburn, just strolling across the Spanish border at the end of The Great Escape, and looking back at my friends, but not missing where I came from.
You can always have Harrogate if you want.
Yeah.
Exactly, we'll always have Harrogate.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, thanks very much for coming on, Ian. That was really, really...
No, thanks for asking me.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you for coming.
Brilliant.
Paul, are you going to wrap up?
No, I've just wrapped up. That's it.
Oh.
That was me wrapping up.
Oh, okay.
Everyone said thank you. What else do I need to say?
Oh, I thought you were going to say please tune into this wonderful podcast every week.
Actually, no, you're right. Let's do this quickly. So if you've
You
enjoyed this podcast, tell your friends, Facebook, YouTube, all the social medias, all the things I can't remember, trying to do it in less than 1 minute and burning up time by saying how much time I've got left. We'll see you in a couple of weeks' time. That's it. I'm done. Everyone say goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
See you soon, Ian. Cheers, mate.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Steve. Bye-bye.
Cheers, Mum. Bye-bye.
They said you should have been here last week. I swear you should have been here last